right, let's discuss this now, live now with Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, joining me right now. Scott, I'm glad to have you join me. Now, the whole world is watching what's going on, but let me ask you personally, what do you make of this heated exchange between Trump and Zelensky?
Well, to be honest, this was a setup. This is what was intended to happen. The Trump administration is fed up with Zelensky. Zelensky just spent the entire last week bad-mouthing Donald Trump behind his back. So bad that J.D. Vance had to intervene and say, you don't talk about our president this way. And yet Zelensky continued to do so. He was empowered by his European allies, particularly Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer, who created this pretense that Europe can continue to support Ukraine without the United States. And this week, Donald Trump has deconstructed that. He brought in Emmanuel Macron first, dismissed him, brought in Starmer, dismissed him. And today was a setup. J.D. Vance was the ambush, and Zelensky fell into it, and it's over. I mean, this is the end of the Zelensky presidency. He will not recover from this. Ukraine cannot afford to have him as their leader. I think you're going to see Zelensky being exited stage right as rapidly as possible. This is a disaster for Ukraine, the worst possible outcome for Ukraine, the best possible outcome for Russia. And that's the other thing that we need to bring up. While there are some fundamental disagreements between Russia and the United States about how to resolve this conflict, never once has Russia lost the discipline that it always has had. These agreements have not come to a head. They haven't disrupted this. Russia has taken a back seat to let this train wreck happen. And this train wreck happened on schedule. This was a deliberate setup by the President of the United States, and it's the end of the Zelensky presidency.
Now, with this now, what do you expect to be the outcome of a meeting like this?
The removal of Zelensky as president of Ukraine. That was the intention here. The intention was to set Zelensky up with the pretense of a meeting about minerals, about this treaty relationship, but then to ambush him. This was a pre-planned ambush by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And Zelensky lacks the skill set to navigate that. He did exactly what the administration believed he would do, and it's over now. This relationship is fundamentally broken in Ukraine right now. They don't know how to respond to this. But I will tell you that Zelensky, when he comes home, will be facing a crisis of existential proportions.
Well, do you think that with this kind of meeting and disposition between Zelensky and Trump right now, from what we saw minutes ago, that the deal will still be signed?
The deal is secondary. It doesn't matter if the deal's signed or not signed. It's irrelevant. That deal is supposed to create the foundation for security guarantees that can only occur if there's peace. But that deal was a facade. This was to confront Zelensky with the inconsistencies of his position. Zelensky was the greatest impediment to the United States and Russia to achieve a peace deal, a meaningful, lasting peace deal of consequence. Zelensky was the obstacle. He had to be removed, and now he has been removed.
Well, you have been emphatic on the impact of this on Zelensky's presidency. Let's take it to Ukrainians, ordinary Ukrainians, and even the opposition politicians in Ukraine. What do you think they'll be, what would they be making out of all of this now from your assessment?
Well, this is a disaster. This it should have been foreseen, but it hasn't been foreseen. Ukraine continues to go through a European-backed pretense of there being a viable, functioning, democratic-based government. We saw that with the charade that took place with the Ukrainian parliament voting to keep Zelensky as their president on the second go-around with the European leaders in Kiev. But now, this facade, this charade, this artifice has been exposed. Zelensky is not a democratic elected president. He's not a rational leader. He is irrational, dangerously so. And the Ukrainians, I don't know if they can recover from this. This could be the beginning of the political collapse of Ukraine. One would have thought that the political collapse would follow military collapse and economic collapse. But right now, because of this meeting, we may see political collapse lead, setting up, economic, social collapse, and then ultimately military collapse. But either way, this is the end of Ukraine's resistance. The war is all but over at this point.
All right, the EU has been steadfast in its support for Ukraine, and you have heard from Macron, you've heard from Keir Starmer, and even other EU leaders and so on. With this meeting that Zelensky has had with Trump right now and how things have turned out, do you think there's going to be a U-turn, or what impact do you think this is going to have on the EU support for Zelensky?
Well, first of all, let me just point out that it doesn't matter. The EU is irrelevant. Ms. Callas showed up in Washington, D.C. earlier this week expecting to meet with Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and he would not meet with her. Donald Trump is sanctioning the EU as we speak. He has called them an illegitimate organization who is fundamentally opposed to the United States. The EU is not our friend. The EU is not our ally, and they will never be treated as such. They are a problem. So from the Trump administration perspective, the EU doesn't matter. Whatever the EU does as a result of this is irrelevant. They will not get a seat at the table, and there's nothing they can do to save Zelensky. Zelensky has committed domestic political suicide in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian people will resolve this issue one way or another. But the EU is irrelevant. Look at how Macron was treated. Look at how Starmer was treated. Look at how Callas was treated. Europe has no gravitas. Europe brings nothing to the table. They can talk, but in the White House, they're just not listening because Europe doesn't count, doesn't matter, doesn't factor in.
All right, we have to leave it here now. Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.